Alright guys, Bitcoin Buildify back with another blog commentary. The subject or the title of this one is Disruption, Blockchain versus the Status Quo. So, one of the things that makes cryptocurrency in general and Bitcoin in particular kind of controversial is the notion of disruption, because it's decentralized. No single third party can have majority control over it. So there is some concern that it could be, beyond the control of governments, of course, and that could lead to trouble somehow down the line. And then on top of that, there's also the issue that the blockchain technology is kind of by its nature a disruptive technology. It has the potential to uproot and replace a lot of the status quo. So in this post, I've kind of shared my thoughts on it and tried to put it into some historical perspective. So let's get started. So with the continuing rise of blockchain technology and its growing recognition as a new and better way of doing things, which it is, there is also a degree of FUD, which is fear and doubt. You hear that a lot when you're talking about investing and trading. In regard to both the legitimacy of this type of technology and the potential level of disruption it may cause to the status quo. So we seem to be at something of a crossroads here in the first half of 2018. We have on one side certain large institutions, the gatekeepers, if you will, whose very existence embodies the trusted third party whom Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he may be, proved utterly unnecessary with the introduction of the Bitcoin blockchain in January of 2009. So that's what's scaring banks and things like that, is their reason to exist and exercise control is essentially removed from the equation. So that's what we have on one side. On the other side, we have an increasing number of individuals, startups, and smaller institutions embracing this new blockchain technology and thinking of ever more services and industries it could facilitate, along with ways to improve the platform itself. Indeed, things are happening with blockchain. So the cat's out of the bag. This has largely, almost entirely, been facilitated by the internet, right? So there are a lot of correlations between blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and the internet. Some people call it blockchain and cryptocurrencies Internet 2.0. And the correlations run very, very deep, and they tend to play off each other and leverage each other. So that's where we are here in May of 2018. Things are kind of just building and building. The notion of becoming obsolete by simply being blown out of the water by something better is not a comfortable one, nor is it a new one. Nobody likes the idea of the new guy in town rearranging everything without you having a say in it. That's kind of an extreme thing to say. We don't really know how things are going to play out. So, but I go on to say the blockchain is to the current state of data management what the steam engine was to the Industrial Revolution. Some may take issue with that, but in terms of efficiency and transparency, both of which could potentially go a long way towards saving costs and resource expenditure. The blockchain's pretty hard to beat. Okay. Evolution, biological, technological, or otherwise, is not always convenient in how it manifests, but it usually does, after a sometimes messy changeover, bring something better than what was before. Okay, so evolution is the enemy of protectionism, right? The good old boys, those on the inside of the clubhouse, some of them don't want things to change. And that can lead into a whole slew of other, issues regarding why the world is the way it is and blah, blah, blah. Not to get political about things. Let's continue. Technology cares not, and the good usually wins. So the fact of one technology superseding and leaving another to the annals of history is nothing new. Nearly every modern contrivance in our daily lives is a newer, improved version of something older and now out of use. Not exclusively. Sometimes things will retain a kind of traditional use for fun, horseback riding, something like that. And going back even further, even older technologies were, in their day, improvements on something that came before them, right? Otherwise, everyone would be chasing wild animals around and trying to kill them with their bare hands, right? It all is improving and building on itself over the centuries and millennium. So, but it is true that the progression and evolution of technological capacity is a ruthless one. It is also highly democratic in that if a new technology offers a way of doing something more efficiently, it will be adopted quite naturally among those who seek to use it. Okay, so there's a lot of examples of this. Cell phones are a very good example. If we follow that line of evolution back, it would probably take us to the telegraph, right? Which was actually being used up until the early 21st century, believe it or not, which is pretty amazing. But from the telegraph, we moved to the telephone, right? Landlines, which there's a huge expenditure to maintain the infrastructure and build it and all of that. And then finally to cell phones. And now it's kind of unusual to call someone at home on their landline, right? The technology of the cell phones is just so much more convenient that it's won out over the old-fashioned landlines. So we can see that a lot in how things progress. And so there is a certain kind of democratic element of it. It's kind of, people use phrases like voting with your wallet or voting with your feet, right? Where if something isn't good enough, you don't buy it, and if somewhere isn't good enough, you don't go there. You buy something else, you go somewhere else. So now that blockchain is out of the bag, so to speak, the likelihood of a similar thing happening is pretty real. But again, we can't really say to what degree it will happen, and or how soon. Oh boy, let me zoom back up here. So let's continue. There are exceptions, of course. So despite the rise of the computer, tablet, and smartphones, we still use pen and paper, right? Sometimes that's just the best way to do it. Although you'd be hard-pressed to find a vendor to supply you with papyrus, right? So the paper we use today is an improvement over the paper we used to use. Another example, horseback riding, in spite of the numerous motorized ways of getting around, is still a popular hobby, although your sanity would be seriously questioned if you rode a horse everywhere you went. And then even in our world with its vast array of digital media in the form of videos, music, and so on, people still take time to go to concerts and live performances. Even Shakespeare consistently packs the house after nearly 500 years of producing no new material whatsoever, right? So it's not always the case that one technology will completely obliterate another one, but it will generally take more of the market share over time. And throughout history, there's continuously been a cyclical kind of evolution to the development of technology, and it's only growing more rapid and pronounced here in the 21st century, and it's doing so at a rate that is accelerating. So, especially with the development of communication technology like the internet, where we're able to share vast amounts of information and make it very easily accessible, it facilitates acceleration and development of technology. It's almost like it's pulling itself up by its bootstraps, right? The more it develops, the more capacity it's able to feed back into itself. And it's pretty amazing. It's hard to imagine what our world will be like, even in another 10 years. So anyways, I'm just going to say it's safe to say the world of today will not be the world of yesterday, of course, and the world of tomorrow will also be quite different. Change is certain, and in our world of increasing interconnectedness, scalability, speed, and sheer volume, it's difficult to imagine what form these changes will take. and further, how they will be handled. So let's talk a bit about the extremes of change and adoption. The dynamics of the situation can be polarized as such. On one end, we have disruption. On the other, we have incorporation. So disruption being the initial shock to the area a new technology takes hold in, and incorporation, the gradual streamlining of this new thing into an eventual state of normalcy. And we're surrounded with case histories of these events. So historically, with the introduction of the majority of new technologies, there's been quite a bit of exaggeration as to what the real impact will be. And by exaggeration, I mean either vastly underestimating on one side or vastly overestimating on the other what the actual effects will be. With the introduction of the TV to nearly every household in the US, for instance, it was thought that the end of radio was near, right? People believed, well, that's it for radio. With the introduction of digital media, many thought books made of paper would disappear from the earth. But obviously, although these technologies did see widespread adoption, their predecessors continue to exist. So although the initial disruption may send shock through its area of implementation, the general level of speculation is rarely as accurate as we would like to believe. A lot of it kind of boils down to chaos theory, where there are just too many elements. The system is too complex to accurately predict any kind of outcome. But you can generally predict in a general way that if one technology is noticeably better than another in whatever way it is, it will probably see adoption to a point that eventually will kind of supersede whatever came before it. But that's not always the case. So it's kind of hard to tell. So there are exceptions where a new technology is so undeniably good and does so much more efficiently than whatever it is replacing, that instead of incorporation, we see it totally supplanting its predecessor. You can take firearms over the sword and spear, or automobiles and trains over horses, the computer over the typewriter, the internet over the telegraph, and in the case of the internet, just about everything else not totally dependent on a physical form to function has been superseded by the internet. In each of these cases where adoption of one technology over another led to the essential demise of the former, we can see the death of one industry and the birth of another. But this is another subject altogether, and if you are interested in exploring it, we recommend this article. Let me just show it to you real quick. Well, let me zoom up. That's annoying, those pop-ups. Please go away. Teaching Robots Through Trial and Error. It's kind of a cool read. Won't spend too much time on that. Back to my article. So it focuses, the article I just linked to focuses on the more recent rise of robots replacing workers, but the essential principle of technological evolution changing how things are done is the same. So on the one hand, there's this fear of new technologies doing things like taking away jobs or wiping out industries altogether, and that can be very justified. But on the other hand, if we think in terms of evolution, there are certain parameters and even paradigms that might help us to, if we can't completely let go of them, to maybe at least put them in the background or put them on hold and consider different options. So with the issue, for example, of robots replacing workers, it's easy to think, well, now what are all the people working on the cars going to do? And that is assuming that people want to work on cars like that in the first place, and that there is an actual need, that the economy is going to collapse because we don't have enough people to work on, or because people can't be employed working on cars. So we need to kind of expand our boundaries and maybe even consider the idea that actually going to work at a job in the future may not be necessary. If we really take things to the extreme, what constitutes work today in the future might be seen as kind of strange. An example might be most people used to grow their own food, and now we rely on a very, very small percentage of the population to do that for us. So while there is the risk of technology taking over our daily life and leaving us, up the creek with no income, we also have to think that can also push us towards innovation and free up more time and in some cases more capital for developments that will actually create a better life for us. But of course we need to be careful. We can't just say, oh, it'll be fine. You always kind of have to follow the middle way. So anyways, is blockchain a game changer? So we have to ask ourselves, in light of all the hype we've been seeing online and hearing in advertisements, is blockchain one of these exceptional technologies bound to blow everything else out of the water? Is it going to tank the current global system of digital transaction as we know it? Personally, my answer is yes and no. Yes, because it is a game changer in the sense of the back end of all digital transactions becoming far more transparent, secure, and distributed, right? It is conceivable that the internet itself could become something like one massive integrated blockchain, right? Where all of the benefits would be of blockchain technology would be present in the internet. It might not happen. So that's what we have on one end, and on the yes end of blockchain being a game changer. On the no end, I say, but no in the sense of creating a revolution like we have seen with other technologies such as the automobile, airplane, personal computer, etc. For those in the first world, instead of suddenly having a completely new ability made available to us, like we did with things like the airplane and the automobile, etc., we will likely see a higher level of access and speed combined with a lower level of risk and associated fees / profit taking. So what I'm trying to say here is, as revolutionary as the blockchain may be, for the average person, it might not be that big of a deal, because it's not, for lack of a better word, as materialistic of an innovation as other inventions have been. Right, we're not going to wake up to a new world where it's oh my gosh, we can cross oceans in a few hours, we can drive across the country in a day. Things like that have happened to people. People alive today have seen unbelievable change in the world. Even my generation, I was born in 1981, and it's a completely different world. But some innovations are a lot more subtle. And the blockchain is 100% digital, right? It's basically a software protocol. So whether or not it's going to make this massive impact is hard to say. But for those paying attention to it, for sure, we will see a lot of change. So let me continue. One point worth mentioning is, despite the yes and no answer to blockchain being a game changer, is for those in the third world, blockchain technology could very well be a massive game changer, and that's subject for another post, and I'll make a video on that. I'm almost done with that post, actually, with the writing at least. I'm kind of polishing it. So I think it's likely we'll see the blockchain functioning as an extension or substratum of our current system, allowing it to work more efficiently. And I just go on to repeat myself, basically saying it's not doesn't have a very big analog presence, and it's not really going to change our day-to-day life in a physical way by that much, save for maybe allowing us to spend less time doing things like accessing accounts and really minimize the risk of mistakes or compromises to the security of your online accounts. For those working in banking or any kind of data management, shipping, things like that, we'll probably also see a pretty noticeable reduction of paperwork and significant cost savings and labor savings potentially too. Okay, Let me just jump down now. So I've divided this up into potential effects of blockchain implementation in the short, mid, and long term. So let's talk about the short term. What may be the immediate effects of blockchain implementation? The truth is, though, that for the time being, there are simply too many factors involved and too many established institutions in the way to make any clear statements about the real future of blockchain one way or the other. I think I've said before, in terms of blockchain, we're actually about where the internet was around somewhere 94, 95, 96, where it's just kind of coming out into public use, and data about its use is being generated. So it's really difficult to say. People back then in the mid 90s, they didn't really know how it was going to go either. The people in the community were blown away by it. You know, they could see it for what it was, but the public and the companies that could benefit from it didn't catch on right away. That took a few more years. So because of that, I think the immediate applications and adoption of this technology will be relatively slow in coming. This is mainly because large companies, particularly those involved in core services such as finance, energy, governance, and so on, are rather like freight trains on cruise control. That is, they do not lend themselves very easily to large-scale change and tend to have a certain level of resistance to it. Inertia, tradition, bureaucracy, and sometimes full-blown incompetence, that's a funny word, often conspire all too successfully to keep the status quo a little too status quo. And that's not to bash, the banks of the world and the governments of the world and whatnot. They are very large, complex systems, and asking them to simply switch over to a new type of database and absorbing the costs and side effects of doing that is a lot. Okay, we can't just expect things to happen that quickly. There's also a lot of risk involved, in the case of blockchain technology, we're not talking about a supplemental type of application or a system that will act as an extension of what is already in place, which in the beginning, that's largely what the internet was. The internet didn't come along as a means of utterly replacing the way business is done. Although in time it kind of did that. Initially it just offered a way, kind of a new channel, I guess you could say, where people could leverage their existing operations, right? In the days before Amazon and Google, these things actually took years to take hold. So in a similar way with the blockchain, we're probably not going to see it take over right away, and it might actually take a little bit longer because it is actually a replacement. It's not a supplement to the way things are done. So that's going to take a little more doing, so to speak. Let's see. So we're talking of a replacement for how data management is done. This is something that may well present potential clients and their companies with certain hesitations and concerns. And this will, of course, be a highly temporary situation, this idea of companies having concerns and hesitations. But it is something worth considering. There is, between the hype, capital, and marketing being poured into the blockchain development, a gap separating it from the real world. Okay, so we have to remember that it's still very much in developmental stages, and a lot of what you're seeing, if you're into the cryptocurrency world, you're not really seeing solid, proven platforms. You're seeing them being your initial coin offerings, right? You're seeing the beginning of companies. So it's kind of a different scene. So although there is a lot of hype and a lot of money moving around in regard to the blockchain, in terms of the blockchain actually being used and developed, the activity is happening on a much smaller scale for now. So we need to think about that, right? There's the real world where real money and real data is moving around in huge amounts. And there's the blockchain, where a comparatively small amount of money and data is moving around, and we're still generating the use data, right? Case histories. And on top of that, there's a few reasons why it's going to take a little bit of time for blockchain technology to be embraced and used at scale. So one is it requires a degree of special knowledge. As promising as blockchain technology is, it still requires a considerable degree of computer literacy and coding ability to make use of it in any direct way. So as a service, it will likely remain in the hands of the developers and engineers actually building it. Same thing can be said for the internet, especially in the early days. Even sending an email took a lot of skill. You really needed to know about coding and software just to say hi to someone on the internet. So it would be hard to imagine the average Joe interacting with blockchain technology without, at the very least, a more user-friendly platform being designed, built, and implemented by, wait for it, a third party. So even today, you can log on to blockchain browsers. You just Google search blockchain browser, and you can search and view Bitcoin transactions. But those are coming through a third party that's made the website. It's a subtle difference. It doesn't change things that much, but you're not looking directly at the blockchain. It's something to keep in mind. So this notion of a third party kind of functioning as a portal to the blockchain would be similar to something like an interface, something like an email account, right? Users would have secured private access to their own accounts and transactions, but the actual traffic and work on the blockchain may or may not be accessible to them in a direct way. However, a record of it would most certainly need to be made accessible, or the purpose of using blockchain in the first place would be altogether defeated, right? We need to have, at the very least, an access to the records held on the blockchain. Next reason, we would need coordination with existing industries. This is kind of a mutual consensus where everyone says, okay, let's use blockchain. So that would be to be even remotely useful, blockchain technology will need full acceptance from and coordination with the industries and communities using it. Although it is designed to function as a kind of standalone distributed platform, users on both ends will need at the very least a degree of consensus and collective motivation in using it, right? So it's to go back to the internet, if you're dealing with an old school client that says, I only use fax machines and phone calls, or I only meet in person, none of this email, that limits you, right, in terms of using the internet. You need both A and B to agree on using it. And of course, if we're talking about, full-scale use, you're going to need, A, B, C, D, all the way to Z times 1,000,000 for it to really be accepted. So if the first few cases of mass-scale blockchain usage are as successful as many hope, the proliferation of this technology throughout the digital world could likely see an accelerated rate of adoption. This was largely the case with the internet within a few years of its introduction, and this proliferation has continued right up until today, and it's actually still continuing. I recently heard only about 40% of the global population is online, and even that is pretty phenomenal. We're talking just over, 23 years, give or take. 40% of the world has come online. So it speaks to the facility of the internet, right? It's a perfect case of an incredibly useful technology simply being adopted on its merit alone. You don't have to sell it. It sells itself. Okay, another reason things are going to take some time would be smooth onboarding, right? This point is somewhat in line with the issue of mutual coordination between existing industries, but deserves separate attention because it calls for something more fundamental. The full replacement, even if in stages, of current data management structures with something entirely new. This notion of onboarding, i.e. bringing a new technology on board and infusing it into the existing platform, is not always as easy as it may sound. So there's going to be some hiccups, there's going to be some delays, it's going to be a learning curve. We can't just, stop the current way and jump over to blockchain overnight. This is not to say that blockchain technology is not up to the task. That would be a ridiculous thing to say. Look at that misspelling, I gotta fix that. Or even think. But it is true that there is no single platform or use case with blockchain technology that approaches, say, for example, the volume of digital transactions of a company like Google or Microsoft. I know that's not a fair comparison, but it's a true one nonetheless, right? Blockchain is still functioning on a very small scale. And it's going to be kind of, you do it first, and then it's going to become popular. You do it first. No, you do it first. And then eventually the momentum will reach critical mass, right? Which brings us to what the effects of large-scale implementation of blockchain technology may be in the midterm. So again, let me preface this. This is an area for which there simply isn't enough data available to make any accurate assumptions with any huge amount of certainty. We all know that. So that said, I think that it is likely that after a few years of successful blockchain implementation and the use case data resulting from it, we will see an accelerated rate of adoption across the world. This will likely lead to widespread leapfrogging in currently less developed areas of the world and to higher and faster rates of adoption among first world nations. This isn't exactly a very complicated point, but it is kind of a necessary stage. I talked about it in another post about the adoption of technologies. Why the Wolf of Wall Street is wrong about Bitcoin. So that was focusing largely on Bitcoin, but we have to remember that Bitcoin and blockchain are interdependent. So in the midterm, once we start seeing successful case histories of blockchain implementation, it's likely the frequency at which companies start adopting it will increase. Just like anything like Facebook, the internet, driving cars, riding on airplanes, there's an initial stage where it's kind of like, I don't know, man, this is pretty different. I don't know what to think about this, and then everyone's doing it, and then you kind of look silly if you're not. So leapfrogging, I'm sure you guys must know, but let me just break this down. The likelihood of widespread leapfrogging, what this is basically when, a good example is the telephone. So let's say there's an underdeveloped region somewhere in the world, could be, sub-Saharan Africa or an island out in the Pacific. There's simply no capital, there might not even be a skilled labor force to build the infrastructure for a landline network, right? So they just skip it altogether. They just build a cellular network, right? You can just have towers every now and then, instead of building, everything it takes to run thousands and thousands of miles of cables. You just have a couple hundred towers. Still a big investment, but it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than starting from the beginning with a landline system. And they call that leapfrogging because you jump right over one stage of technological development into another. And it's very likely that with blockchain technology, we'll see that happen. Instead of investing in these huge server rooms for old school data management systems, they'll just implement blockchain, distributed networks, and go from there. So with the massive labor and a cost-saving potential of blockchain technology, it's very likely that with sufficient use case evidence of the real utility of this technology, we may see its adoption spread like wildfire, exactly as the internet has and continues to do today, right? Again, critical mass. Right now, we can't really say one way or the other, but there are serious companies investing serious amounts of capital into its development, although on a global scale, it's still happening on a very small level. IBM is probably the biggest name, the biggest known name looking into blockchain technology. But there will likely come a time, once the competitive edge is made clear, that something like a paradigm shift may occur, as is often the case with when a new technology proves to be truly revolutionary, and any platform not using blockchain will be made to look very silly indeed. So silly, in fact, that they may see themselves going bankrupt. So there may come a day, just like with the internet, where today if you don't have a website and you're expecting to have any kind of presence in the market, you're not being very realistic. That day could potentially come with blockchain technology. The long term, alright, what's going to be the effect of full-scale blockchain implementation in the long term? So this is the really big question, right? Everyone's asking themselves, what's going to happen? So use, facility, and issues concerning adoption aside, how will things have changed once blockchain technology has essentially replaced the current status quo of digital data management? Let me grab a drink of water here. My mouth's getting dry. Okay, so to answer this, I think it's useful to analyze how the world and nearly every element of our lives has been changed by the rise of the internet. For those of us who were around in the pre-internet days, we may remember it as a time of comparative inconvenience, which it really was, comparatively speaking. But again, at the time, it was state-of-the-art, right? That's how it goes. In pre-internet days, transactions essentially all happened in person, over the phone, via the occasional fax, or even by what has now become to be known as snail mail, right? So compared to today's online world of ever-connected, ultra-efficient, light-speed communication and data media transfer, it is hard to imagine how anything ever got done before the internet, right? It sounds kind of silly, but it's true. It's really not that much of an exaggeration to say that what may have taken months in the days before the internet can now be done in a few days, hours, or in some cases minutes. Just think about sending a letter versus sending an email. Or placing an online order on Amazon or a Shopify store versus driving across town and buying something. There's just so much more savings in terms of efficiency and time these days. So with full-scale blockchain implementation, I think we will see yet another increase in the magnitude of efficiency of daily data transactions in the same way we saw with the internet. So we can see that today with anyone who's ever made a Bitcoin transfer or a transfer with Ethereum or any of the altcoins that run on that blockchain versus a traditional bank transfer. Right? In the best conditions, a traditional bank transfer is probably going to take about a week, and the fees are going to be, approaching highway robbery. With Bitcoin, you can do it in about 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer. So I think with the internet, we're going to see another increase in the level of magnitude in terms of certain types of transactions, not all of them, but it's very conceivable that could happen. So if you want, a key point worth mentioning is that it will be more independent, allow us more access, more capacity, and it will be more secure, right? Third parties will be dropping left and right, or at the very least, seeing their reign of power reduced, right? They're going to become more service providers to the blockchain instead of kind of overseers of transactions. Okay. So then there is the issue of how current industries, those whose very existence is defined as being that old and ever-present trusted third party, will fare. So to continue on, for sure things on this front will change. In my last post, I discussed 10 industries that could benefit from blockchain technology. They're listed here: IoT, network management, healthcare, supply chain management, retail point systems, It's not really that big, anyways. The energy sector, data marketplace, ID technology, copyright and royalty transparency, education, and last but not least, real estate. So it stands to reason by the very nature of blockchain that those industries that could benefit from it will also initially see some disruption as well. This goes back to, a new and superior technology being something of a threat to the status quo if the status quo cannot adapt. So some of these companies may see themselves become a shadow of what they once were. Think about AT&T, for example, or Kodak, which I think Kodak might be gone altogether. I'm not sure. These used to be giants in their industries, right? Not anymore. Others may see themselves leveraged by several orders of magnitude. We can think direct mail versus email marketing. Massive savings there. Able to reach way, way, way more people, way more efficiently than they ever could with direct mail. And the cost savings, I can't even imagine how much money they're saving with email marketing. But a lot will depend on how the affected industries succeed or fail in adapting, right? If you don't pivot, you just keep going on your trajectory, it's going to be game over, right? So history has shown that innovation rarely occurs more than but once in a single company. This is kind of sad but true. Oftentimes the new growth curve will stem from an idea born in a different industry or by a different group altogether. So an example I've heard of is the evolution of ice in people's home. Okay, it used to be the only way to get ice in the old days was to go somewhere cold. And these areas were rarely near any big cities or the clientele that wanted to buy the ice. So the business model was get a bunch of sharp saws and strong dudes and ships, sail up to where the ice is, chop the ice up, put it on the ships, and bring it back down to where the people are. Later, a different industry sprung up, which was able to create ice artificially. So gone were the days of the ice ships, right? They were done. But ice factories still needed a fleet of trucks to deliver the ice to their customers. And so shortly thereafter, the refrigerator was invented, and then the ability to create ice in the refrigerator was invented. This was a third separate industry that did away with ice factories. So history is full of things like this happening. So we can look back at, it may have been the case in the days of ice that these people never knew about each other, They may have had no way of getting in touch with each other, or they may not have wanted to get in touch with each other. These days, with the internet, it's a lot more possible for industries to get in touch and devote capital to talented individuals that can help their operations pivot and develop solutions, provided they have the modesty to know there's a problem and to stay abreast of what's happening in the world. If they're arrogant about it and think, that they're the only reason they have all this money instead of their customers giving it to them because of the service they're providing currently for now is worth it, if they forget that, then it's going to be game over. Okay? You can't always just continue on a straight line. And to close that point, it is the rare individual or company that can adapt to changes in technology gracefully enough to keep their operation unaffected or, at the very least, afloat. So, assuming blockchain is fully adopted by those industries that stand to benefit from it most or suffer the greatest losses for not adopting it, I think we'll see a radical restructuring of how services are delivered and also in the amount of resources required to deliver them, which is also a massive potential benefit of the blockchain, right? Especially in less developed regions of the world. So this last point A reduction in the amount of resources to deliver a service is quite profound when considering how much more current resources can be leveraged and the sheer number of people that stand to benefit from it, particularly in currently developing regions of the globe. I kind of repeated myself there. I'm sorry about that. Now, some argue that we may see some institutions disappear altogether. To me, this seems a bit of a stretch. While we will certainly see a reduction in the size and likely the power of many institutions as third-party overseers, their total disappearance may be pushing it. I could be dead wrong about that. We might see another like ICE type story, right, where you're stuck with all these ships, nowhere to go, and then all these trucks in this huge factory and no customers. Could happen, but we still will need a means of interfacing with the blockchain in a way that is convenient and further coherent. This may come in the form of dedicated apps or other digital media, but even these will still require a human presence to design, update, and adapt them to the needs of the market. So it's all about adaptability, right? Adapt or die. It's a story of evolution. Way more than 90% of all the species on the earth that ever lived here are gone because they couldn't adapt. You can't really expect us to adapt our bodies that quickly anyways, but the point remains, adapt or don't, and not adapting, the market need for your service will cease to exist, and sooner or later so will your operation. So instead of seeing companies acting as the ultimate arbiters of the services they currently offer, we may see them becoming something like portals to the blockchain, in a similar way to search engines acting as portals to the internet today. Right? So let's take the example of Google, and even Facebook to a certain degree. They're simply platforms. All of the data and the services they provide access to are created by their users. And what Google and Facebook can do is simply create a very convenient and coherent way of accessing this data. They optimize it for you. So we may see something like that occurring with the blockchain. We probably have to see something like that occurring with a blockchain. And of course, those companies that act as first movers in designing and structuring these kinds of services will naturally shoot to the forefront of a new frontier, provided they can stay on that leading edge, right? It's not guaranteed. We can look at the early days of the internet, again, to return to the analogy. Companies like AOL and Yahoo really stand out. They're still around today, although they've been all but utterly smashed by Google. And there's different reasons, but it kind of boils down to a lack of adaptation, right? They didn't adapt to the market. They didn't find the angles that Google did, and it's business, right? It's survival of the fittest. But of course, in business, when we say that, it doesn't always mean the biggest, best company or the company with the most money. It means the company that brings the best product to the most people. So anyways, that's kind of going on a tangent. So, considering this, we can see how striking the analogies between the rise of blockchain technology and the internet that preceded it really are. In the same way that someone in the early 90s couldn't possibly imagine being able to visually check their bank balance, book a hotel, and chat with a friend on the other side of the world, all from a device they can hold in their hand, nor can we really imagine the level of convenience, independence, and automation a truly integrated, accepted blockchain platform or platforms could bring to the world. Now, this is also assuming that adoption of the blockchain and development of the blockchain proceed in a way that allows its full potential to really be embraced. And this won't strictly be cryptocurrencies. I think we'll naturally see a lot more development going into smart contracts, right? So for more complicated, individualized, if that's a word, transactions. Okay, we're not just talking about sending money to somebody somewhere. We're talking about things like buying a house or legal proceedings or even medical procedures, all of the information and necessary data for that moving through the blockchain. So it won't just be cryptocurrencies. There's going to be a lot of development necessary in smart contracts as well. And this will also tie into methods of decentralization and secure distribution. There's going to be so much happening. So as I say, it's an exciting time and definitely one to stay up to date on. With new changes and developments happening all the time and new companies and applications coming together, the future for blockchain looks very bright indeed. So, preview for the next one. Our next post will be focusing on how blockchain technology could potentially help a vast amount of humanity in the undeveloped world join the rising tide of globalization. And as always, if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me here at admin@bitcoinbuildify.com. And I'm also involved with a few platforms that are of a more financial inclination, Mintage Mining and Crypto World Evolution. You can read about them on my site, or you can watch them on YouTube as well. I've got some videos for that. So with that, I'll be signing off. For those of you who made it this far, thank you as always. Happy cryptoing and best of luck.